Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club, the book club podcast in which we undertake the massive project of discussing in story order all of the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and today, as always, we have a three-person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Doctor Who fan since 1979, that would be me. We also have our intermediate-level casual fan, who has seen several episodes but has not previously read any of the books. And this time around, it's our good friend Danny Celedon. Hello, Danny.
Hello, how are you?
And finally, representing the novice fan who has seen little to none of the original series and previously read none of the books, we have the always lovely Sheena Annapera.
Hello.
All right, today we're looking at the novelization of the very first Doctor Who story, but strangely enough, it's not the very first novelization. There is a story behind that, but in the meantime, here are some fast facts.
Doctor Who and an Unearthly Child, written by Terrance Dicks and adapted from the story written by Anthony Coburn that aired from 12/23/63 to 12/14/63, published by Target Books in 1981. As of this recording in December of 2016, this title is currently out of print, 119 pages.
All right, so a few things to tell you about this book. First of all, it's the 68th in the range, though it's published 65th, and it's Terrance Dicks' 41st Doctor Who book. So this is by no means his first one.
Jesus.
He had done 40 by this point. At this point, when the books were being written, he'd managed to get his writing speed down to a month per book.
Wow.
Except this one had to be rushed. This one had to be rushed because it was 1981. The incoming producer of Doctor Who, John Nathan Turner, wanted to do a season of repeats, and they wanted to do the very first Doctor Who story, and someone realized, oh, it's never been novelized. We need to have a novelization of this pretty quickly. So they asked Terrance Dicks to do it in a faster time than normal. How long would you guess it took him to write this, Sheena?
2 weeks.
Exactly 2 weeks. It took him a fortnight to write this
Really?
book.
Wow.
2 weeks.
Yes, which may or may not explain any flaws that we may find in it as we're discussing it. So, just for those of you at home who may not be familiar with the story, though, if you're not, why are you listening to this podcast? You should know the story by now. The story of An Unearthly Child is that two school teachers, Ian and Barbara, get really curious about a student of theirs who is indeed unearthly, and it turns out she is unearthly because her grandfather's an alien, she's an alien, they get kidnapped, and they get taken back to prehistoric times in which they have a search for fire. So, let's start with Sheena and ask, what are your first impressions of this book?
My first impression was it was a quick read.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite interesting since I haven't really read any of the Doctor Who novels.
Mm-hmm.
I found it enjoyable. I did feel like it was a quick story.
Mm-hmm.
So that would probably be something we're going to talk about later.
All right.
But yeah, I enjoyed it. It definitely made me want to read another story just because it was nice and easy. So I enjoyed that.
Terrific. Okay, Danny, what were your impressions?
I think so too. The story was very quick. I did not know that it was written in 2 weeks, and it doesn't read that way. I mean, it is quick, but not 2 weeks quick. So
Yeah, it doesn't have that rushed quality that you would think that it would have. And that's really a testament to Dix's writing. That's going to be hard to say, Dix's writing.
Dix's writing.
Dix's writing.
Sounds like a band name.
It does, or a bad porn joke. We're going to have a lot of Dick jokes, unfortunately, because he's written a lot of books. How did it fulfill or defy your expectations?
It fulfilled my expectations in a sense. I mean, I had nothing to expect.
Right.
Because I'd never read anything, but it fulfilled it in the sense that it made me want to read more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would explain it being fulfilling, because it made me interested.
So it's kind of like the first hit.
Yeah, it was like,
they drag
exactly.
you in.
Then I'm like, okay, well, I'll take some more then.
Excellent.
You know, having watched the episode before, it was some time ago that I've seen it. It was interesting to see how the author was going to portray the different characters, seeing as to how this is like an introduction to all the characters. And I think it was pretty spot on. You kind of get the feeling of who everyone is.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the story has to do, being the very first story. The thing is, obviously, that anyone reading this in 1981 already knows who the Doctor is.
Right.
They already know what the Tardis is, and that's why we get that really interesting intro to this book, with the policeman going into the junkyard and checking around and seeing the TARDIS sitting there, not knowing it's a TARDIS, but saying there's a police box there.
And that would also probably be, I mean, I had never seen the episode, so in most books, when it's the first book, they kind of describe clothing or how someone looks, and there's a little more detail in that sense. But I didn't get any of that. So that would probably, you know what I mean? Like that, usually when you're first introducing characters, there's some sort of like, and he was a tall, slender man with, you know, and there was nothing like that. But I mean, it was still, you know, I still have, I guess it's kind of good in my way because I have a whole thought in my own head, kind of. But I am interested to see what it really looked like.
So you'd want to see the episode after having seen this.
Definitely.
I can't say it's going to be all that interesting.
Yeah.
Because of various Clan of the Cave Bear type deal, but on a BBC budget, 1963.
I can see that.
It's very bare bones, and yet, it has its interesting moments. Danny, what were you saying before about, you were talking about the description of the Doctor? Since we're talking about descriptions,
more along the lines of like this, like descriptions of their personalities. I think the author did a very good job of letting everyone's personality shine through. Certainly, he explains their motives as they're going through whatever dialogue they're going through. Like you can see like their thought process behind, like, oh, he's feeling very, very arrogant about this, or he's feeling very, you know, whatever the case is.
Right.
You know, he makes sure to take time to explain that as he goes along through the plot.
Yeah, he even does that for the policeman at the very beginning, and that's something that scene actually is in the episode. But you just see the policeman come through as the theme is playing, and then he goes out again, and then you see the TARDIS, and you get the first title screen, and that's it. But he actually gives that character not a name or anything, but he gives him some motivations. The guy just wants to get home, get some sweet tea, get some sausage sandwiches, and then the next day he finds out that the 2 school teachers have vanished, and so is the police box, and he doesn't put it together in his head because who would put 3 people in a police box?
Yeah. The characters were definitely described by their personality, that's for sure. That's something that wasn't lacking. You can tell each person, like, what kind of things, like, scared them, or, you know, what they were good at, and things like that. So that was very, that was a good character builder, I thought.
Well, as someone who hasn't seen the episode and is probably not familiar with this version of the Doctor, what did you think of his description of the Doctor and his characterization in this?
My description, like, how would I think he looked?
Yeah, let's start there.
I would think he was kind of a thin man, old but not too old. And I would just see him, I don't know, I kind of, not unkempt, but very erratic type looking. And that's pretty much what I thought of. Because they said he was old, but he wasn't that old. So I was thinking like 50s.
The actor was in his 50s.
Yeah,
but
that's
he's
what I was
portraying a
thinking.
character who's much older.
Yeah,
obviously.
I was thinking he must be older than he is because he's an alien, but he probably didn't look incredibly old.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
That's about right. Would you say that that's spot on with the description? Because you're familiar with Hartnell.
Yeah.
In fact, we were talking about this the other night. You were saying that one of the things you liked most about this book was its depiction of the Doctor. And how did you put it? Said he was just a complete asshole in this?
Yeah, he has quite a few moments where he's just kind of a dick about everything.
Okay.
So there's the one scene where the tiger has attacked one of the cavemen and
Za.
Yeah.
Yeah, the imaginatively named caveman.
Yes. Yes.
And her. She's female and she's her.
Yeah. And the Doctor picks up a rock and he says something about like, oh, I'm just gonna go over to him and ask him to draw a map of where the TARDIS is. It's like, you're not giving him a rock for that. You're gonna bash his skull in, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a moment that's actually in the televised version too, and that's something that really bothers fans because they don't like thinking about the Doctor as murderous at any point, and yet that's obviously what's going on in the scene. In fact, it worries Terrance Dicks so much that when he comes back to write the first BBC book, The Eight Doctors, in 1996, the Eighth Doctor is traveling back through his own timeline and visiting all his former incarnations at major points in their lives. And he visits the first Doctor just as he's picking up that rock and is about to go over and bash Zaz's head in. Yeah, and it's one of those moments where he says, why are you doing this? And you get more into it.
The way you guys are describing it, though, I see it as like, this is their first mission around other people. And I'm thinking a lot of the other times when he's went to a different place, they've had to just go.
Yeah.
And he only had him and his granddaughter, and that's who he's worried about. He's not worried about who he's affecting because it's not his time frame. And they've already been doing this so long that you're probably just like cold to it. You know what I mean? But then you have the other characters like Barbara, who's like, we need to help this person because she's new and, softer and hasn't seen all these things. So I'm guessing later on they probably start to get a little harder.
A little
bit. Maybe not so quick to jump, but
exactly. There's cross-pollination that goes on.
Yeah, that's how I read it as.
Yeah, and I think it's even described that way in the book. Dick has Ian think something along the lines of just how ruthless is the Doctor willing to be to protect himself and his granddaughter. In the next book, he's about to find out just how ruthless the Doctor can get, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, it's a bit of an uneasy moment, especially for longtime fans, but I'm sure that's probably, if that's your first encounter, you're thinking this is very much...
As a first encounter, it just seems like a normal thing you would do,
So it's very in character for you?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I could see how after the fact, though, it would make you feel uncomfortable just because you have read all these other things with him being so, I don't know how he's going to be.
Right.
But maybe a little more accepting or a little more into learning about the places he goes.
Right.
So, to me it seemed natural, I guess.
Yeah. In fact, it's kind of strange that by the time you get to the 80s, you've got a whole contingent of fans who are kind of nervous about the fact that he has a granddaughter in these early episodes because they want him to be this sexless character who doesn't deal with things like sex and family and such.
Yeah.
But the first Doctor is grandfather.
Yeah, definitely. He had to have came from somewhere.
Yeah,
I would think.
Yeah, exactly. And a very fiercely protective one at that. So that's something that, you go back and forth in fandom about that, whether or not the Doctor had a sex life. Obviously he did. Does he have a family? Obviously he did. You mentioned Barbara, and that was something that I thought was interesting about this book that I had completely forgotten because I haven't read this book since the mid-'80s when I was a kid. And by then I'd already seen the episode. No, it was the other way around. I read the book, and then I saw the episode a few years later and thought, yeah, this is every bit as disappointing as I thought it was going to be because it wasn't the Daleks, basically.
Yeah.
But as far as Barbara's characterization goes, what did you think?
I thought she would be... I took her as, okay, this is in the 60s. She's a typical woman. She seemed like she was... I thought of Barbara as more of like a woman who was coming out of her own kind of, like becoming like more liberated. Just because, like, she had a lot to say about things, had no problem stepping up type of woman. And for that time, knowing when the book was written, I found her to be a little bit more of a good female character for a book. Okay. That's what I thought of her as, very strong and opinionated and a go-to type of person.
I thought she was kind of quiet, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah, for some reason I kind of felt like the entire struggle. We had the cavemen and our time travelers, But then within the time travelers, it seemed like the major focus was the clash of personalities between Ian and the Doctor. As for the other half of our time travelers, I didn't get too much out of them.
There was definitely not a lot of with Susan, for sure.
Really?
Yeah. Barbara had a good front beginning part, and as the rest went on, she became more of like a more docile, motherly type of character, I would say.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And interesting you should say that about Susan, because Susan is ostensibly who the story is about. Because the book is called An Unearthly Child. It's Susan.
Yeah.
And yet, especially with the televised version, she's only the main focus of the first episode, the first 25 minutes.
Right.
By the time they travel back in time, it's all about the damn cavemen.
Yeah.
And that's where it loses a lot of people at that point.
I could see that.
But as far as Barbara goes, the thing that I thought was kind of worrisome is that I don't think Terrance Dicks likes her very much, because at one point, when he's first introducing her, he says something along the lines of, she would have been prettier if she smiled more often. And I'm like, having just come out of the election, that sounds like exactly the sort of things that were hurled at Hillary.
That's like the worst thing you could say to a woman. Or about a woman, really. Like,
yeah,
that's
exactly.
kind of like a pish posh, like, oh, you'd be prettier if you smiled more. Well,
yes.
No thanks.
Exactly. And if you ever see pictures of Jacqueline Hill, who played Barbara, she's gorgeous. Even if she's got a frown on, which happens with Barbara quite a bit.
Resting bitch face.
Yeah, exactly. She really has that going on, and maybe that's it. But he later describes her behavior. He has Ian think that she's engaging in her usual unthinking bossiness.
Liberated woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. A woman of the early 60s.
Which is just
about to burn a bra.
Exactly.
That's what I got from her, you know? Like, she's like, we're going to do this, Ian. We're going to go see what's going on. If you want to come, I'm going by myself. And that's what I got from her. Yeah. Even though that fades in the end a lot, but the beginning was very like that.
True, but props to her for speaking up and saying, we're not leaving this wounded caveman just to die out here.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
We're taking him with us.
Yeah, she's the one that absolutely refuses to do it. As a matter of fact, the gender dynamics in this book are kind of interesting, because even though the main characters are ostensibly the Doctor and Ian, and you say that most of the conflicts between them, it's the women that are really the prime movers in the book, because Susan's the main reason we get to the story in the first place. Barbara ends up being an impetus of her own. And then you've got, oddly enough, the cave women. You've got her, for instance, who's kind of like this Lady Macbeth character, who wants very much for Za to be the leader of the tribe and to be his woman. But by the same token, Cal is so much better at everything and seems to be this, bad boy from across the mountains. And she seems to be pushing Za along the path that he's going. And then there's the old mother. We got to talk about the old mother. Oh my Lord, what did you think of the old mother?
She was kind of, you brought up the election. She was kind of like she was pretty much the person who didn't want anything to change. If we bring fire, everything's going to go horribly, and that's just how I started. I actually, this will be one of the questions later, I thought she was the worst character.
Really?
I thought she was even worse than, Cal.
Really?
Yeah, in the sense
Let's talk about that now.
Yeah, in the
sense
that, it's like they're cavemen, okay? They're hungry. They have to kill food.
Right.
You have to tan the skins and cook. They had no fire.
Right.
The person who was before Za didn't teach him how to make the fire. That was one thing I was interested about too. Like, what did he have, a book of matches or something? Or a lighter, had this happened before? But anyway, she just didn't want anything to change. And you have to have things change if you're going to progress.
Yeah. It's like this extreme
to me,
conservatism.
she was kind of somebody who just wanted to, under any circumstances, keep things the way they were, even though that wasn't necessarily good.
Yeah, it's not very good for the common good of the tribe, is it?
No,
Because
it's only good for
fire.
her because she's used to that.
Yeah, I could see that.
Everything you just said reminds me of that one character from High Claudius.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
Is it Livia?
Is it Livia's the one that's poisoning everybody else?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How so? Because she does have that quality to her.
She's got her machination. She's controlling everyone like puppets and getting everyone to do her will without actually being in power.
Yeah, I'm not sure the old mother has that much power, though. That sounds more like her, because her could probably turn into Livia. Yeah,
not that sophisticated, but in
none of them are sophisticated.
No, they're cavemen. So.
Yeah, and yet it becomes a political battle.
Yeah.
It is the weirdest thing. That was something else I noticed about this book. I was like, wait a minute. I'm reading a book about cavemen, and suddenly maybe it's the election we just got out of, but this is firing on all political thrusters.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But you really didn't like the old mother as a character.
No, I didn't. I mean, I could understand Khal probably even more just because, I mean, he's from another place. Mm-hmm. He's a good fighter. Za wasn't really stepping up. Right. So, I mean, that's what happens in, when you don't have certain things is there's always going to be a fight for supremacy. So I could understand his character. But I just didn't like her. It's actually, like I said, she was my least favorite character. Just because when I was reading it, I was like, why would you not want fire? Yeah. Like, why would you not want to cook your food?
Yeah.
I just didn't understand that. Or to keep the beasts away from your tribe while it's dark. That was another one of the points that they needed fire for, too. So so the beasts can just come and pick off children and old people and... You're cool with it?
And the winter's coming.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, it's nice.
It's nice right now, and it's still freezing. So it's like, you need these things,
Yeah. In fact, there's something interesting that some people have looked at this story, and they've looked at the old mother as kind of her worries about fire being reintroduced to the tribe as worries about the nuclear bomb. Because it is 1963. Mm-hmm. And we're not too far away from, oh God, I wish I could remember the name of the documentary the BBC did right around the same time. It's done in realistic style, but it's about what would happen in Britain if they underwent a nuclear attack. It is terrifying. Mm. And in fact, they played it in theaters, and then they banned it. Because it was
scared everybody so much.
It's terrifying. It used to be on Netflix, and it's not on there anymore. But that's the sort of worldview that she seems to be coming out of. That technology, even though it can have ameliorating effects, is ultimately damaging. As it turns out, she's right.
Yeah, yeah, it's right, but it's also, I mean, it also comes to the fact of like, how far do you want to progress? There's always a limit. And this is like the beginning of progression. Right. So I don't see it as a bad thing.
One thing I'm kind of sad about is that in not seeing the episode, you can't get Eileen Way's fantastic depiction of that character because she's just a hag.
I pictured her as I pictured her as like an old crouching woman with like white hair and...
Oh, she's terrible.
Yeah,
Za will not make fire. And the way she dies is just kind of sad, too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because Khal just stabs her right in the heart when she let him go.
Mm-hmm. And then tries to frame Za for it, but isn't quite smart enough to carry out the deception.
Exactly. That's why he was a good fighter, or a good hunter.
Right. What were some other characters that struck you?
The cat.
The cat.
I love the fact that the author took the time to write like a couple of paragraphs in the cat's point of view.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Because you never see it on screen. Never. You never see the saber-toothed tiger in the televised episode. It's all told from the camera is from the cat's point of view. Okay. With some roars going on the soundtrack.
Yeah, that would have been a hard thing to try to prop.
It would have been hard to wrangle in 1963. So that impressed you that he would actually got into the cat's head.
That you actually get the reasoning behind the cat's actions. So.
What I didn't understand with the cat though was why were they saying they were like unearthly? there was a description of the cat, like, saying that it was not like it seemed to me that it was from a different planet, or like I got the kind of thought that it might have been mechanical or something like that.
Oh, really?
I think.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think what happened was that the cat was trying to smell them to see what they were about, and he's like, "These people are weird. They're not like the rest of the."
Okay, so it was from the cat's perspective.
Yeah,
okay,
they,
see, that's
they
what I
seem
was
alien.
like. I was like, is the cat like not from there?
No, but they aren't.
Yeah,
so
then, okay,
when it smells the doctor and crew,
understand.
it's an alien smell to them.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're probably got perfumes and soaps and all that they don't. Yeah, but even little things like that, Dicks tends to get a lot of flack because he'd written so many of these by that point, and people tend to think of Terrance Dicks' style of novelization as very script to page. And that's true. He will go directly from the script and make very little changes and go straight to the page, especially in these later books. And yet, there's a lot of innovation going on in this, too. Because you got the cat's point of view, you have how he changes certain things, especially when they first go into the Tardis. And they are talking to the doctor, and I believe it's Barbara who calls him Dr. Foreman.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Oh, no, my name's not Dr. Foreman. I just call myself that to get along or whatever." And then Barbara says something along the lines of, "What is your real name?" And he says, "Well, I don't discuss my personal life with strangers." Which is weird, because he doesn't do the first part on screen, but he does do the second part. He does have, he gets stroppy about discussing his private life with strangers, but that whole business of calling him Dr. Foreman allows them to do the first of many Doctor Who jokes, where he says, "Huh? Doctor Who? What are they talking about?"
What?
Yeah, exactly. And he does it like 3 times in this book. And I imagine that he's gotten sick of it by this point, but he realizes, the fans are going to expect it.
Yeah.
That's what's going to come out of this.
Want.
We have to do this. The TARDIS not changing shape.
Yeah, that was a malfunction, they said?
Yeah.
The chameleon circuit not working.
In the chameleon circuit. Now, I don't know if you remember this, Danny, but in the televised version, it's not called that, because they hadn't coined the term chameleon circuit until Tom Baker's last season, which was the year before this book was published. Mm-hmm. So that's Dicks going in and doing some retroactive continuity and saying, "Oh yeah, that's called the chameleon circuit. Let's put that in there." Which is really kind of nice, because later you get things like references to the time rotor, which comes even later. So he is innovating some of it and doing some good ideas with it. What else struck you? What other things did you have questions about?
Okay, this is one thing that I was wondering about. Okay, so this is the first book. Mm-hmm. So when he got into the TARDIS,
right,
the TARDIS was malfunctioning, and that's why they're traveling aimlessly through time. Is that correct?
Something like that.
And he also doesn't really know how to operate it?
Right.
Okay.
Here's what I got, is that they left. They've been traveling for some time. They arrived in England in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And so they've had time to study like the geography, the plants, the rocks, and whatever. So when they accosted the 2 teachers, they went back in time, and they were in the middle of analyzing the rocks and the radiation and all that. There's that thing with the Geiger counter getting smashed at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So once they're getting in the TARDIS at the end of their little adventure, they're running away. There's some line about, well, we didn't have time to analyze
where we were, what time it was.
Yes.
So it's easy to get back and forth when you know where you went and where you're going to go back to. But since we didn't do that, now we don't know where we're going to go next.
Exactly.
Is that...
Yeah, that's accurate. Because at one point the Doctor has a line about the Eurometer being off.
Yeah.
And he says that Susan called it that. Susan names everything in this book, which is just... That's something that strikes me as bizarre even to this day, that Susan says, "Oh yes, I made the name up from the initials, time and relative dimension in space," and yet that's what it's been called by all of the Doctor's people. Every time we ever meet them, that's what they call it. It's like, wow, that really caught on.
That's the root of it.
Yeah, it must have been called that before, but he has a line about the urometer being off.
Mm-hmm.
So they need to, which is weird because this never happens again. They need to do analysis to figure out where they are so they can get a sense of where they've been, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that it was just off for that moment, or?
Possibly.
Okay.
Because they took off without any preparation.
Yeah, because what it seemed like to me was that it was like totally malfunctioning in multiple ways.
Well,
just because like you said, the chameleon aspect wasn't changing, and the time wasn't, working, and it just seemed like, he was frazzled about like working everything. Right. So to me, it seemed like it was something they had been doing, but maybe not doing, like they had been in the 60s for a long time, and they were just trying to repair everything, it seemed like.
Right. And in fact, go ahead.
Right. And on top of that, it kind of gave the sense of, well, we left the 60s, we went into the prehistoric time, and now we don't know how to get back to the 60s. So you guys are kind of stuck with us for a while.
And the weird thing about that is that actually becomes a plot point in the third story, which you all may or may not be on the panel for. But there's something called a fast return switch in the Tardis. And apparently the Doctor can press that and go directly back to the last place they were. Except that malfunctions and they almost lose the ship and their lives in doing it. So there are lots of reasons not to go back to England. They keep coming up with reasons for it. But later stories reveal that the Doctor has stolen the TARDIS from a repair bay. So it's not in tip-top shape. We find out later that it's very old.
Are these, are in his time frame, these are made in multiples?
What, the TARDIS is? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is not a
it's not like a one ship.
No.
Okay.
No.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
That's how you know I don't know anything.
No, that's fine. Yeah, it's very much its own thing at this point.
Yeah.
But later on we'll find out there are plenty of these things. It's just by the point that he and Susan leave their planet, they've gone on to, sports cars, and he's managed to steal Model T, which is exactly the analogy for it. It's just really, really old. Come to think of it, that the problem with the ship breaking down and all that, and that's going to be something that's going to come up in the second book too, is the main reason why they're in so much danger at the end. Because at the very end of the book, they decide, we'll go check out the surface planet soon, but let's go get something to eat. Let's take the radiation count. And it reads normal, and it's only when they leave the room that it starts clicking. Which is going to be a bit of a problem later, because book 2, The Daleks, was written about 10 years before, and it was written as if this story doesn't exist.
So there's going to be some inconsistencies?
Oh, yeah. In fact, you're going to be introduced to Ian and Barbara all over again. And to the Doctor and Susan all over again. And we'll have to talk about how those two introductions are, how they differ and which one's better. Favorite scene?
My favorite scene was in the cave when they're trying to get away the second time, and they use the skulls to scare the cave people to thinking they're like dead, but like zombie dead skulls. I thought that was really great. That was it was a good play on the fact that like because from reading the book, you think, okay, you forget they're kind of cavemen, like they are, but you forget. But then that like brings you right back to like, yes, these are like extremely simple people. Also, too, I like the other part where the Doctor gets them to take his way by having them all take one side by like making this big thing about it's the part where at the end when the Doctor is getting everyone to go against Cal. Yeah. And he gets them all to go by just being like, and da-da-da-da-da.
Drive them out.
Yeah. And then they're all like, yes, group mentality. And that was a good part too. I found that pretty humorous.
Yeah, and that works well in the televised version as well. How about you?
I was going to say the part with the skulls where they put the fire in under the skulls and make them think like, oh, they're ghosts. And, they kind of like quickly sneak out like behind everyone and run back to the Tardis. I really like that. I also like the initial conversation that Ian and Barbara have about Susan and how there's a lot of inconsistencies coming from a mathematical background. It was kind of interesting to see like her like they were talking about like she couldn't solve some mathematical problem without
3 dimensions,
right? Without adding the additional dimensions, because she said it just didn't make any sense otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, those early scenes are probably my favorite ones, when they're flashing back to the classroom, especially the bit about British currency. Because at the time the episode aired in 1963, they had not, Britain hadn't switched over to decimal currency yet. They were still doing that bizarre system that Terrance Dicks actually has to describe in the book, because the very kids that are reading that book won't remember that currency system, because these books, I don't know if you noticed this, but these books are targeted towards 11 to 14-year-olds. And so none of them would have been alive. But at the time that it was made, they hadn't made that switch yet. There was just the feeling that they would eventually. And it didn't happen until, I think, 1973. Yeah, so it definitely foretells the future in some ways, but he's able to write as if it's a done deal.
Right.
Were there any lines that stood out to you as particularly well written or particularly badly written? Was there anything you just hated?
I think there was a lot of at the very beginning there was a lot of descriptions of the Doctor as the old man and things like that. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of some description, he's just called the Doctor without us knowing that's the Doctor, or my name is Doctor, or you can call me Doctor. There was nothing like that. The narrative just decided to start calling him Doctor from that point on. It kind of made me cringe just a little.
Because you were thinking if this is the first book that anyone's reading,
right? There'd be much more of a little fanfare.
Yeah, I could see that. Did it strike you?
Yeah, mine's kind of on the same level or same wavelength. Like for me, it being the first book, like I said earlier, there was no real descriptions of anyone, or of anyone's past, or you know what I mean. And usually reading a book for the first time of any series, there's something like that. And I didn't get any of that. So that was kind of a little, like, not off-putting, but just like I wanted to know more.
And I'm wondering if that was deliberate. I'm wondering if that's a sign, one of the few signs we can see of Dicks having to rush this out.
Yeah.
Because he got 2 weeks, and this is going to air on TV within a month of publication anyway.
Yeah.
So he says, well, everyone kind of knows what these people look
so
like.
let's not get into it.
Yeah, that might be it. Which is weird, because if you get to the later books, there's always a description of how the Doctor looks. The other characters, not always. And after a while, it's almost as if he's got them on macros. Because it's like, oh, Tom Baker, curly hair, long scarf, or Joe is described this way, or Sarah Jane's described this way, and the descriptions keep coming up, and you're like, oh my god, okay, fine. But this time, you're right, there isn't really a description of Barbara, except that she'd be prettier if she smiled.
Yeah, like you can't really pinpoint anything really about anyone, it's just all kind of in your mind. Like I see Barbara as being like medium-sized woman with like blonde hair. I mean, really? I don't even know if she has blonde hair. So, you know what I mean? That's just, I mean, I'm probably totally wrong. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just because, like I said, I've never seen I've seen new Doctor Who episodes.
Right.
I have. But I've never seen the old stuff. So to me, like, I'm thinking of her as like this typical 60s woman with the flip hair and like the headband. Yeah, that's how I'm seeing her. And, so
I'd be interested to hear your reaction to like a cast photo or something like that if you could pull it up.
In fact, if you do a Google search, and do image search for.
Do I just look up her as a character?
Yeah.
Or?
If you look up Barbara Wright. Yeah, because it's interesting because in the movie version, the first movie, Barbara is kind of a strawberry blonde. In fact, she's more of a redhead, I believe. But, There she is.
Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah.
totally off. Now that I see her, I could see that being school teachers.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, because he says that she's very small.
Maybe I'm thinking of like Night of the Living Dead. Maybe that's
They're
why
coming
my
to get you,
my
Barbara.
mind went to that, probably.
Yeah. If you look at that second one, in fact, that is a publicity photo. For those of you listening at home, it's the fairly iconic photo of Jaclyn Hill in front of a book, and she's looking off to the side of the screen, and she's got this fairly lovely, what would you call that, a coat or a jacket?
like a jacket.
Yeah, because
more of like I would say when women first started wearing pantsuits,
Mhm.
like a longer jacket pantsuit.
yeah, though the closest you'll ever see Barbara write to a pantsuit is that she wears leotard pants in the second story, and occasionally throughout. She's got a very momish way of dressing, really, which is a shame because Jaclyn Hill, if I remember correctly, was only in her mid-30s at the time she made
Yeah,
the
they
show.
definitely make her look a lot older than I would have thought, for sure.
She's an absolutely gorgeous woman.
No, she is.
If you're trying to figure out what she looks like from the description in the book, you can kind of see it, but even the description of her dark hair is
It's not.
And Ian, good lord. From my own experience, having read so many of these books before ever seeing a Hartnell episode when I was a kid, Ian was nothing like I expected him to be. He was never what I expected William Russell to look like.
Okay.
Yeah, except the weird thing is in this book, for some reason, Dicks repeats the description of Ian taking things as they come twice.
Yeah.
He just loves that line.
It's like he's this on the fringe of being a hippie type of thing, like
more like
laid
an action
back,
man.
like I kind of got him as like a guy who's like really, okay, we'll just do it, like, you know what I mean? We'll just take it as it comes,
Which is so strange because Ian is very not laid back.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the one who freaks out when they go into the Tardis. So
Yeah,
much.
he freaks out way more than she does. For
Yeah,
sure.
and Barbara's like, no, I just believe them. That's all. I'm willing to give them a chance. He's like, I can't believe that, one of the great things, that's Ian.
So, Ian was like how I would have expected.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, in fact, that second picture is the publicity shot from that first episode.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly
one of those
how I
things.
would have thought.
Now, you haven't seen the first Doctor, Susan, right?
No.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. Because I meant to ask you what you thought of the description of the first Doctor as Dicks does the description, because I think he's got him spot on. He really captures that quality that Hartnell has.
I personality-wise, clothing-wise, sure.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the look on his face, the general look on his face, not really.
It's hard to capture that, though.
Yeah.
I mean, Hartnell gets that weird twinkle in his eye even when he's being, bad, which is quite often.
Mm-hmm.
And you found the shot of Susan I saw. Interesting story behind that. That is the first Vidal Sassoon haircut to ever appear in a television show.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, because
That's
he was
right.
a young hair designer
Nice
in London.
pixie cut.
Yeah.
Wash and set hair.
Very unearthly at the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, when she told him what she was doing, he said, "Let me do something strange with your hair. I'm sure you'll love it."
Yeah.
And that's the haircut.
Wow.
Yeah, it's definitely before its time.
Yeah,
that's for
before
sure.
its time.
You
Yeah.
wouldn't imagine.
So very, very modern for then. Very futuristic.
Yes.
Yeah.
For that time period.
Yeah, and definitely for a 15-year-old who's being played by, I believe she was a 22-year-old actress at that point. She already had a child of her own. Oh, how could I forget that? One of my favorite scenes is when the Doctor's trying to reassure Barbara in the cave, and she says, "You're trying to help me. Why?" And he says, "Well, fear makes companions of us all." And that's a line that's going to be a plot point in the new series. In fact, you may not have gotten to that episode yet. But when you hear it again, you'll be like, oh, that's all the way back from
It's a
1963.
reoccurring.
Hope and fear.
Yeah. And it goes all the way back to the Doctor's childhood, as we find out. What we are going to do is go to the Goodreads website, because other people obviously have some opinions of this book. I'm stealing that line from How Did This Get Made podcast. And this book has been rated 574 times on that website with an average rating of 3.67 out of 5. And a few of the reviews are kind of, exactly what you'd expect. But Alejandro, for instance, who rated it 4 stars, says of it, "It's quite amusing reading how an advanced alien scientist from the future wasn't able to make fire simply because he lost his matches." Which makes sense because Ian's the one that does the fire.
Yeah.
Which is just bizarre. Oh, the doctor's smoking!
Yeah, the doctor's smoking, and on top of that, Ian has his matches in his pocket the entire time.
Yeah.
Does he?
Yeah, because they made a point of pointing that out.
Oh, I thought
Yeah,
they
they did.
I thought they were.
I forgot about that.
Because
that was
he
probably
picks
an
up all his stuff.
inconsistency right there.
I was wondering when that was going to come up.
Okay, I didn't catch that.
As soon as I heard it, I was like, "That's a Chekhov's gun right there." But
and it never comes up.
Nope. They have to make their own bow and drill to make fire.
Yeah, which is how they end up doing it. Well, maybe they were doing something like the Peace Corps does, where they do something that's...
Yeah, but also, too, I mean, that's more of an effective way to teach people how to make fire, really, because then it's something they can, do that on their own.
Yeah, it's
now, when you run out of
culture.
matches, what are you going to do then?
Yeah.
And that's the part where they were like, oh, he knew how to make fire, but he didn't show us. He just put his hands in the... That's the part, for me,
the
where I was like,
leader.
Where did he find it? And how come he never...
Well, I always thought that it's because the way this tribe looked at things was that the person that could create fire was de facto the leader.
And you didn't want to teach anyone because if you did, they were on par with you.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas that makes sense of Ian's line, in our tribe, the fire maker is the least important person.
Yeah.
Because everybody can do it. And to some degree that's true because we have matches, we have lighters.
Yeah.
We have technology,
it's not
in
as
other words.
big of a deal.
Yeah, exactly. Someone had even read after watching the DVD of the original episodes. In fact, Tiffany Sharam gives it 4 stars, but it's interesting what she says. It's a lot better than I expected. I mainly know this story from watching the DVD of the original episodes, and always considered the caveman storyline to be one of the more dull Doctor Who episodes, only really notable for being the first journey scene. I kind of have to agree with that. The book, on the other hand, made the story a lot more engaging. The characters are a lot more memorable when you're reading their associated character names and thoughts, rather than watching the episodes themselves where there's a lot of unintelligible floundering around. In short, it took a bad Doctor Who story and made it much easier to follow and is such much more entertaining.
Absolutely.
Which is, I don't know, it's kind of downplaying that first story, but yeah, that first story, if you're watching it, it's difficult to watch it.
Yeah.
I
can see how the book is probably better. I mean, that's typical, but I could see how if you were to have... the episode came out in the 60s, right?
Right.
So I can see how it would probably just look like a really bad B flick, like Barbarella or something like that.
Yeah, it's very slow. It has that sort of pacing.
I can see that.
Oh my God, when is this going to go on?
Yes. Not so much in this story because it was a 4-parter, but the Dalek story coming up is 7 parts, and you just want to kill yourself by the end of the 5th episode because it's just like, oh my God, they're throwing a rope across this chasm. Oh my God, they're going to do the whole 25 minutes right here in this cave. Oh my Lord God, Jesus.
I could see that.
Yeah, so there is that. There was also Patricia. I'm going to have Danny read this because it's in Spanish.
Muy buena esa novelita, la primera que leo de Doctor Who. Al que le gusta la serie, aunque no haya visto nada de la serie original, esa novela le va a encantar. Narra el principio de la serie como el primer Doctor. Me encantó. She said it's a very good novel. The first one that I've ever read with Doctor Who. For anyone who has watched the TV show before, you will like this novel. Yeah, this is the first story with Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I loved it.
And the weird thing about that review is this book was never released in Spanish. So I'm wondering why that review was written in Spanish.
I mean, I can kind of read Spanish even though I don't speak it very well, so maybe it's reverse.
Yeah.
Well, if,
You know?
if someone is actually trying to learn English by
Yeah, they
reading,
usually, and I mean, it's a good book. Like you said, it's for 11 to like 14-year-olds.
14-year-olds.
So, I mean, it would be a perfect starter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. In fact, I was trying to pull up the
There's
French
no
review.
really big words that like you'd have to like look up in the dictionary or anything.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, which is one of the things. In fact, for the longest time, these books ended up being bought by school libraries everywhere. And they would get stolen from school libraries
Wow.
everywhere because kids loved them, obviously, but also they were right at the level that was getting people interested in reading.
Yeah.
So a lot of writers for the new series and even the producers have credited these books as the reason why they became writers in the first place.
Wow.
Probably not this one, though. If you were going to rate this book on a scale of 5 stars, what would you give it? Sheena?
I would give it like a 3.8.
Okay. On what basis?
On the basis of the fact that I have never read any other books in the
Okay.
series. It gets a high rating because it was a good read.
Mhm.
It kept my attention. I wouldn't say it's the most exciting of stories,
Right.
so that's why I wouldn't give it higher.
Right.
But I did enjoy it, so 3.8 would probably be my rating.
Okay. All right, Danny?
4 stars. I agree with you. I like the fact that it kind of, having watched the actual episode itself, I like that it condenses down a lot of the padding in that it really gets straight to the meat and potatoes of what the story is about.
Mhm.
It's not overly complicated. There aren't a lot of convoluted twists. It's a lot of, yeah, I could see why this character feels the way they feel.
Mhm.
It's straightforward that way.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a fun little adventure for first adventure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as for myself, 14-year-old me probably would have given it a 2. Because it's just like, oh, God, cavemen. Ugh. And I've never liked cavemen at all. But reading it as an adult now, I'm realizing just how much he added to the story and also made a story that I have difficulty sitting through interesting and exciting. And not just because I knew we were going to be recording the podcast. I was like, oh, God, I'm actually enjoying this. So, yeah, I'd probably give it more of a 3.5. So does it make you excited about the next one?
Definitely. Yeah, I didn't want to rush into it because I was like, I don't want to read it real fast, because I read pretty fast. So I was like, I didn't want to read it now and then
Right.
I wanted to give myself some time. When I like something, I like to get into it,
Mhm.
and I usually read things incredibly fast
Oh,
and then
okay.
get everything jumbled. So I didn't want to do that to myself. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm excited to read the next one.
Yeah, because I think you're in for a treat with the next one. Because the next one is the first one.
Yeah.
The first novelization ever done.
And I'm actually interested, now that you said that they reintroduced the characters, I'm interested to see how they introduce them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to have a lot to talk about when that comes up. The reason why that happened, but also what it means in universe.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's some interesting stuff going on in that book. But, Danny, you're excited about it?
Yeah, I think that first book, the way they left it off with, the little mystery at the end, it left me wanting more. Like, I want to read the next one. So,
Okay,
yeah.
even knowing that you're going to have to go through the introductions all over again.
That's totally fine.
All right, well, terrific. Thanks, guys, for being part of this first podcast. And thank you, fellow time travelers, for giving us your valuable time. Next time we will indeed be reading Doctor Who and the Daleks, or as it's more properly named, deep breath, Doctor Who and an Exciting Adventure with the Daleks. That is the name of the book. And next time I'll even have the Japanese title for you, because the Japanese title it defies description. Yeah, it's bizarre. In the meantime, if you like what you've heard here, like us on Facebook, and you'll be entered in our first Target book giveaway. Ooh. This time, some lucky fan randomly will be picked by me and get a gently used copy of Doctor Who and the AZTECS, which we'll be discussing quite soon in this program. Check out our Facebook page at, deep breath again, Doctor Who Target Book Club Podcast. All one word, no spaces, for more details. Also feel free to give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. We're at DW Target BC, or subscribe to us via the podcast provider of your choice. If you really like us or you feel exactly the opposite way, post your comments, suggestions, questions on any or all of the above platforms, or email us at dwtargetbc, all one word, at gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.